The sun was warm and shining down on me. I had just stepped out of the taxi, standing in front of my home, utterly exhausted but satisfied after 3 weeks of intense contract negotiations. All I wanted was the peaceful sanctuary of my own living space. I was dragging my suitcase towards the entrance, already daydreaming about sinking into my favorite chair with a glass of red wine. But as I got closer to the door, the sounds coming from inside began to shatter my anticipated tranquility. I frowned, feeling a mixture of confusion and growing unease. Was my husband Joshua throwing me a surprise welcome home party? No, that wasn't like him at all. He would never arrange something without letting me know in advance. My mind was racing with a curious blend of curiosity and anxiety as I inserted the key and opened the door. The scene that greeted me made me freeze, as if I had stepped into an alternate universe. My typically neutral, minimalist living room had transformed into a carnival of garish colors and discordant patterns. Dozens of strangers filled the space, chattering and eating as if this were the social event of the year. What in the world? I mumbled, trying to comprehend the chaos before me. A middle-aged woman in an overly floral dress approached, sporting an uncomfortably large smile and holding a cocktail. She exaggeratedly cheerfully told me that this was a reveal party for my home's improvements. I blinked several times, struggling to process her words. A reveal party? What are you talking about? This is my house, I protested. Her high-pitched laugh sent a chill down my spine. Before I could object further, she grabbed my arm and began dragging me through what was supposed to be my home. The walls I had carefully chosen in a sophisticated pearl gray were now covered in fluorescent tropical wallpaper. My carefully selected modern furniture had been replaced with ornate, almost gaudy pieces. Lace curtains now hung where my beloved large windows used to let in natural light. And here, my unwanted tour guide continued, I've arranged this lovely showcase of ceramic figurines. Isn't it wonderful? I stared in horror at the dark wooden monstrosity that nearly covered an entire wall. Dozens of small figurines seemed to stare back at me with painted eyes. But I don't have a collection of figurines, I managed to say. Her response was casual and dismissive. Karen had generously donated her entire collection to create a homey atmosphere. The moment I heard that name, my blood ran cold. Karen. My mother-in-law. Suddenly, everything took on a terrifyingly familiar meaning. Where is Karen? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Oh, she's around somewhere, the woman chirped. She's the hostess of this lovely party, after all. I felt my legs wobbled beneath me. My mother-in-law had not only thrown a party in my home but had completely redecorated without my consent. I needed answers, and I needed them right now. I began pushing through the crowd, swatting away the woman's hand as I searched frantically for Karen. With each step, new decorative horrors assaulted my eyes. Lava lamps, paintings of dogs playing poker, and a massive cuckoo clock that consumed half the wall. It was as if the house had been left with old, unadorned furniture. Finally, I spotted her in the kitchen, surrounded by women hanging on her every word. So I told the decorator, Karen was saying, we need more color. This place was just too boring before. Can you believe it? But now. She trailed off as she noticed me, a cold smile spreading across her face. Oh, look who's arrived. Welcome home, my darling. I stood frozen in place. Even when she approached and pulled me into an embrace that spoke more of possession than affection, I couldn't move. Karen, I finally managed to say, what is the meaning of this? Why would you do this? She waved her hand dismissively, as if redecorating someone's home without permission was the most natural thing in the world. Don't be so dramatic. I've just added a little life to the place. Honestly, you were using this space like a hotel. It wasn't homey at all. But this is my home, I protested, feeling anger rising within me. You have no right to do this without my permission. Karen looked at me with a patronizing expression, feigning concern. Oh, I'm Joshua's mother. This is my home too. And isn't it wonderful? Everyone looks so happy. I looked around the room. Strangers were laughing, occupying my space, eating my food, drinking my wine. In that moment, I realized this was more than an unauthorized makeover. This was an invasion. A takeover. Everyone needs to leave, I said, my voice slightly trembling. Right now. Karen laughed loudly. Don't be ridiculous. The party has only just begun. Oh, and there's something else you should know, she said, guiding me towards the hallway leading to the bedroom. With a dramatic flourish, she opened the guest room door, and my jaw dropped. The simple, comfortable room I had kept for occasional visitors had been completely transformed. The walls were painted a garish pink, and every available surface was covered with photos from various periods of Karen's life. A massive four-poster bed now dominated the center of the room, with new dressers lined along the walls. Surprise! Karen sang out. I'm moving in. Isn't it wonderful? We'll get to spend so much time together now. My world crumbled away. My mother-in-law hadn't just invaded and redecorated my home without permission. She was now attempting to permanently inhabit it. In that moment, I understood I had reached a sudden, unexpected turning point in my life. And the battle that lay ahead would be more challenging than I could have ever imagined. I turned to face Karen, trying desperately to maintain my composure. This is unacceptable. You can't just move in without consulting me, I said firmly. She looked at me with a falsely innocent expression. But Joshua agreed. He said it would be wonderful to have me nearby to help with the house, to make sure things are done correctly. I was so shocked I couldn't think straight. Joshua had agreed to all this without saying a single word to me. That betrayal had irreversible consequences. Where is Joshua? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Oh, he's probably socializing somewhere, Karen replied, waving her hand vaguely toward the party. You know how charming he is with everyone. Determined to find my husband and demand an explanation, I left Karen and moved through the room. Every stranger's face, every laugh, every little conversation seemed unbearable. This was no longer my home. My sanctuary had become a circus, and I was the unwitting main clown. I finally found Joshua in the backyard, surrounded by men I'd never seen before, all holding glasses and laughing at his jokes. Joshua, I interrupted his moment of glory. We need to talk. Right now. When he turned to face me, I caught a fleeting glimpse of guilt in his eyes. It was quickly replaced by a forced smile. You're back. Isn't Mom's surprise wonderful? I grabbed his arm and pulled him away from the crowd. Once we were alone, I let all my frustration and confusion pour out. Wonderful? Joshua, how could you let this happen? Our home is completely unrecognizable. And your mother is moving in without even consulting me. Joshua looked sheepish, but his response froze me in place. Don't be so dramatic. Mom just wanted to help. You know, I've always thought we needed more of a homey feel in this place. A homey feel? I repeated, incredulous. Joshua, she's changed everything. And now she's saying she's going to live here. How could you agree to this without even talking to me? He sighed, running his hand through his hair in frustration. Look, I know I should have consulted you. But Mom insisted this would be a great surprise, and honestly, I thought I'd be happy to have help with housework, especially since I've been so busy with work lately. I could feel my anger rising. Help! Joshua, your mother has taken over our home. Can't you see? This isn't help, this is an invasion. You're being ridiculous, he responded, his tone becoming defensive. Mom is just trying to do her best for us. You should be grateful. The word grateful was the final straw. Grateful? For what? For destroying the peace of my home? For invading my personal space? For making decisions about my life without my consent? Joshua looked increasingly uncomfortable. Look, I know it's a big change. But just give it a chance. Mom has so much experience managing a home, and once you get used to it. I cut him off. I couldn't listen anymore. Stop it, Joshua. This isn't something I should have to get used to. This is my home, our home. Your mother has no right to make decisions about this house. Our home, he repeated in a tone that grated on my nerves. Exactly. And since this is our home, Mom, as a member of our family, absolutely has the right to be here and help us. I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. This was not the man I had married. This was not the man who had always respected my space and my decisions. Suddenly, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Surrounded by unfamiliar people, facing a husband who seemed like a different person entirely. This isn't over, I warned, turning away. I needed fresh air. I needed to think. Avoiding the guests and dodging curious glances, I made my way back into the house, my mind racing at full speed. Something fundamental had changed in my life, and I had a terrifying feeling this was just the beginning of a much larger battle. I reached my bedroom, the only space that had escaped Karen's renovation. I closed the door and sat on the bed, trying to comprehend everything that had happened in the past few hours. My home had been invaded, my privacy violated, and my husband seemed to be taking his mother's side. Listening to the party continuing outside, one thing became crystal clear. I couldn't let this stand. I needed to take action, and quickly. But for now, in the solitude of my bedroom, I allowed myself a moment of weakness. Tears of frustration and anger traced down my cheeks as I contemplated how my perfectly ordered life had collapsed in just a few hours. What I didn't know then was that this was only the beginning of a series of events that would forever change my life. The morning after the reveal party, tension hung in the air. I woke up early, determined to face the situation head-on. Brewing coffee in the kitchen, now unrecognizable with its garish new appliances and lace curtains, I heard Karen's footsteps approaching. Good morning, she entered the kitchen as if she owned the place. It's wonderful to wake up in such a comfortable home. I took a deep breath, counting to 10 in my mind before responding. Karen, we need to talk. I cannot accept what happened yesterday. This is my home. You do not have the right to make changes without my permission. She looked at me with a condescending, falsely concerned expression. Now, don't be so dramatic. I was just helping. This place desperately needed a feminine touch. My feminine touch. I felt my patience rapidly wearing thin. I am the woman of this house, I responded. I do not need anyone to improve my home. Karen let out a high-pitched laugh. Let's be honest. You're hardly ever home. Always busy with work, leaving my poor son alone. Someone needed to take charge. I could feel my blood boiling. Take charge of my home? Karen, this is crossing a line. Reverse all the changes and leave today. Her expression changed in an instant. Her expression morphed from a facade of kindness to pure contempt in an instant. She told me she wasn't going anywhere, insisting she had every right to be there as Joshua's mother. I have no rights here. I couldn't control the volume of my voice. This is my home. I bought this house with my own money. Our argument began to draw attention around the kitchen. Joshua appeared in the doorway, his hair disheveled and a confused expression clouding his face. He asked what was happening, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Karen immediately switched to her victim act, tears welling up in her eyes. She dramatically told Joshua how terrible I was, claiming she was just trying to help and now I was trying to throw her out. Joshua looked at me with an accusatory glare, asking if it was true that I was trying to kick out his mother. I was absolutely stunned. I explained to him how his mother had invaded our home, redecorated without permission, and was now claiming she had the right to live here. I asked him if he couldn't see how wrong this entire situation was. But before Joshua could respond, Karen escalated things dramatically. She began to cry out loud enough for the neighbors to hear. She accused me of being ungrateful, asking how I could repay everything her family had done for me in this way. The commotion drew the attention of the few remaining party guests. Within minutes, the kitchen was packed with curious onlookers, eager to witness the unfolding drama. Ungrateful? I repeated in disbelief. I told her I owed nothing to anyone, that everything I had was earned through my own hard work and determination. Karen began to address the impromptu audience as if she were performing on a stage. She claimed they had done so much for me, that Joshua had accepted me into the family and given me a home. Now, she said, I was trying to push them out. Home. My voice dripped with disbelief. I emphasized that I had bought this house with the money I earned from my own job. But Karen wasn't backing down. With an angry expression, she turned to Joshua. She asked if he was going to let this social climber treat them this way. She suggested the house should be put in his name, calling it the least he could do for the family that had accepted me. I looked at Joshua, hoping beyond hope that he would finally stand up to his mother. To my horror, I saw nothing but hesitation in his eyes. Joshua, I said, my voice slightly trembling. I asked if he could seriously be considering her suggestion, reminding him that this was our home, bought together for our family. He ran his hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable. He casually remarked that, technically, I had bought the house with my money. I was absolutely stunned. I demanded to know what he meant. Was he saying he had no rights? Or that he had more rights than me? Karen, sensing she had the upper hand, pressed her advantage further. She told Joshua that I clearly didn't value family, suggesting it might be time to reconsider things. She asked who had always been by his side, who had supported him unconditionally. The tension in the room was palpable. All eyes were on Joshua, waiting for his response. The words Joshua finally spoke hurt me deeply. He avoided my eyes as he said he agreed with his mother. He claimed I had been working too much lately, barely spending time at home. He suggested it might be good to have someone who actually cared about the house. I was deeply hurt by his words. Are you seriously siding with her? I asked, my voice trembling. Ignoring everything we've built together? Joshua just shrugged, a gesture that in that moment seemed impossibly cruel. He said he was thinking about our family, that his mother just wanted to help. A triumphant Karen stepped closer to Joshua and embraced him. She praised him for being so thoughtful, contrasting him with someone who only thinks of themselves. Rage began to consume me. Thinking of myself? I challenged. I've been working tirelessly to maintain this house, to provide us with a good life. And you call that selfish? But my words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Joshua and Karen had formed a united front against me. The onlookers whispered and cast judgmental glances in my direction. At that moment, something shifted inside me. My anger and frustration gave way to a cold, calculated calmness. If they wanted a fight, I would give them one. You may be right, I said in a surprisingly calm voice. Perhaps I have been selfish, thinking this house was entirely mine. Karen smiled, thinking she had won, but I wasn't finished. Perhaps it's time for some legal adjustments, I continued. To protect the family, I added with a deliberate pause. A flicker of anxiety crossed Joshua's eyes. What do you mean? He asked. Oh, it's nothing major, I responded with an invisible smile. Just a few documents that need signing to make things official. What a wonderful idea. Karen clapped enthusiastically, not fully understanding what was happening. She urged Joshua to call their lawyer immediately. That won't be necessary, I said. I'll take care of everything. With that, I left the kitchen, leaving everyone confused and bewildered. As I climbed the stairs to my office, my mind was racing. I had a plan, and they had no idea what was coming. In the days that followed, I maintained a facade of resigned acceptance. I let Karen walk around the house proudly, boasting about her renovations and treating me like a guest in my own home. Joshua seemed relieved that the conflict appeared to be over. But I noticed he avoided making eye contact whenever possible. Meanwhile, I sequestered myself in my office, appearing to work but actually plotting my next move. I consulted with a trusted lawyer, meticulously reviewing every detail of our finances and assets. The calm before the storm was just beginning. 1 week after our initial confrontation, I made my surprising announcement during dinner. I began by saying I had carefully considered everything they had said, noticing Karen and Joshua exchanging satisfied glances. I spoke about thinking more about family and securing our future. Karen exclaimed in a sickly sweet voice that she had known I would eventually understand. I forced a superficial smile. I told them I had decided they were right and that it was time to make some changes to the house's ownership. Joshua leaned forward, interested. He asked what kind of changes I was talking about. I explained that I had spoken with a lawyer, pulling out a folder of documents. I said I had prepared paperwork to transfer the house's ownership to his name. Karen nearly jumped out of her chair with joy. She triumphantly told Joshua how I had finally understood what was best for the family. Joshua seemed slightly uneasy. He asked if I was really sure, noting this was a big decision. Of course, I answered with a calmness that surprised even me. This is the right thing to do. After all, we are family. I handed over the documents and watched as they reviewed them. Karen was glowing with a sense of victory, but Joshua looked increasingly incredulous with each page he read. I pointed to the dotted line, telling him only his signature was needed. Joshua hesitated. The pen hovered over the paper. For a moment, I thought he might reconsider everything. But then Karen gently nudged him, reminding him this was what they had always wanted. And Joshua signed. Wonderful, I said while collecting the papers. I told them I would file the registration as soon as possible. That night, while Karen celebrated with champagne she found in the refrigerator, I retreated to my room and locked the door. I pulled out a suitcase from the closet and began carefully packing, selecting only essential items and meaningful memories. As I folded clothes and packed jewelry, I reflected on the events of the past few weeks. Joshua's betrayal, the invasion, losing my home. Everything had changed me in ways I could never have imagined. But they didn't understand. They could never have imagined that this apparent surrender was only the beginning of my true plan. With each piece of clothing I packed, I felt like I was moving away from my old life and preparing for a new beginning. A beginning they would never see coming. I was going to teach them the true meaning of family and the consequences of underestimating someone who has given everything. Especially someone they thought they could easily manipulate. The morning dawned with a deceptive tranquility. I woke up early as always, preparing myself for what I knew would be a significant day. Standing in front of the mirror, I noticed how much I had changed. I was a stronger, more resolute woman now. A light of determination shone in my eyes that had never been there before. When I went downstairs to the kitchen, Karen was already there, preparing breakfast. She moved about as if she owned the place. Which, legally at least, she partially did now. "Good morning," she sang out with a sickly sweet false kindness that turned my stomach. She told me she had made Spanish omelet, claiming it was my favorite. I forced a smile. I thanked her for her thoughtfulness, my voice dripping with forced politeness. I sat at the table and watched Karen move around the kitchen with an almost arrogant confidence. Every movement, every gesture seemed to scream, "This is my home now." Joshua joined us a bit later, his hair disheveled and wearing an uncomfortable expression. I noticed he was avoiding eye contact, likely feeling guilty about the previous day's events. "My son," Karen said, piling omelet onto plates, "now that the house is officially in your name, we should make more changes." She suggested renovating the garden or converting the unused office into a playroom for visiting cousins. I felt my blood boiling but maintained my composure. This was the moment I had been waiting for. "Actually," I interrupted with a surprisingly calm voice, "I have some news to share." They looked at me, Karen with suspicious eyes, Joshua with a mix of curiosity and anxiety. I announced that I had decided to take some time for myself. I was going to travel, for a few weeks or perhaps longer. Travel? Joshua finally found his voice. He asked where and why. Karen could barely hide her joy. She declared it a wonderful idea, saying I should rest my head and not worry about anything. She would take care of everything. I ignored Karen's comments and focused on Joshua. I told him I needed time to think, to reevaluate some things in my life. I assured him this was for the best. Joshua looked genuinely confused, as if the idea of me having a life outside these four walls was a foreign concept. "Work can wait," I responded with an unfeeling calmness. I reminded him that the house was now in his name. I expressed complete confidence that he and his mother would manage everything in my absence. I caught a glimpse of panic in Joshua's eyes. Karen confidently declared they were more than capable. She even suggested the trip was exactly what I needed. She claimed it would help me see things from the right perspective and understand what truly matters in life. I nodded in apparent agreement. "Exactly right, Karen. This trip will make things very clear," I replied. Breakfast continued in an awkward silence, with occasional comments from Karen about her plans for the house. I observed Joshua, noticing how he seemed to sink deeper into his chair with each of his mother's words. After breakfast, while Karen insisted on cleaning the kitchen as if it were now her duty, Joshua followed me to the bedroom. He asked if we could talk, closing the door behind him. I crossed my arms and faced him. I asked what he wanted to discuss. Joshua fidgeted nervously, running his hand through his hair multiple times. He wanted to know if this trip was because of what happened yesterday, because of the house transfer. I let out a humorless laugh. "The house transfer?" I said. "No, Joshua. It's about so much more." I explained how it was about every moment he chose his mother's side over me. I told him about every time he allowed her to disregard me, to make me feel like a stranger in my own home. "That wasn't my intention," he stammered. He said he was just trying to keep the peace, that he understood his mother could be difficult. He insisted she only wanted the best for us. "The best for us?" I repeated in disbelief. I described how she had invaded our home, redecorated without permission, moved in without consultation, and was essentially trying to push me out. I asked him where the best for us was in all of that. Joshua fell silent for a moment, inner conflict visible in his eyes. Finally, he spoke. He admitted I was right, that he had been wrong. He promised to talk to his mother, to tell her to leave. For a moment, I saw a glimmer of hope. Perhaps Joshua was finally coming to his senses. But then I remembered every moment of the past few days. All the opportunities he had to protect me, and didn't. It's too late, I said quietly. I told him this was about more than his mother. It was about us, about the trust we had broken. I explained I needed time to think about what I truly wanted in life. What about our future? His voice was barely a whisper. I looked into his eyes, seeing the fear and uncertainty there. I don't know, Joshua. That's one of the things I need to find out. After that, the day passed by in a flash. I packed my suitcase while listening to Karen continue talking about her plans to redecorate my bedroom. Joshua wandered the house like a ghost, seemingly torn between loyalty to his mother and a growing understanding of what was at stake. As night fell, the tension in the house became palpable. I decided it was time to make my final move. I picked up my suitcase and went downstairs, finding Karen and Joshua in the living room. I'm leaving now, I announced. Karen feigned surprise, asking if this was so sudden, as she had expected me to leave in the morning. I replied curtly that I had changed my mind. Joshua stood up, seeming to want to say something, but words caught in his throat. It was then that Karen appeared to decide to show her true colors. With a cold smile, Karen said it might be for the best. She pointed out that the house was now in Joshua's name, and they could start doing things their way. She claimed she didn't mean to offend me, but my lifestyle wasn't what a real family needed. I felt something break inside me. All the frustration, anger, and pain of the past few days rose to the surface. A real family? I repeated, my voice trembling with anger. I asked if she meant a family where a manipulative mother-in-law exploits her son's weakness to control her daughter-in-law's life, and a husband can't protect his wife from her abuse. Karen went pale, while Joshua seemed to shrink into his chair. She started to speak, but I cut her off. No, it's my turn to talk now, I said with a strength I didn't know I possessed. I told her how I had worked hard for years to build my life and create a home. I spoke about enduring her hurtful words, her interference, and her constant belittlement. I said I had reached my limit. I turned to Joshua, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the sofa. I reminded him that we were supposed to be a team, supposed to support each other. But when he should have stood up to his mother, he had remained silent. Worse, he had taken her side. He tried to interject, that wasn't my intention, but I stopped him. I told him his intentions didn't matter. What mattered were actions. Or in this case, the lack of them. Karen regained some of her arrogance and stood up. She suggested that if I felt this way, leaving was best. She argued that it was clear that I didn't appreciate all that she had done for me. I let out a bitter laugh. I reminded her that I had bought this house. I had maintained it while her son worked at his company. I had devoted my time and energy to building what she now thought she could easily take away. I saw the shock on their faces. Perhaps realizing they had gravely misjudged the situation. But you said one thing correctly, I continued. I should leave, because I realized I didn't belong here. Where my opinions weren't valued, my work and sacrifices were ignored, and I was treated like an outsider. I picked up my suitcase and walked toward the door. Turning back one last time, I told them to enjoy their real family. I hoped it was worth the price they would pay. I walked out, closing the door behind me. The fresh night air enveloped me, bringing a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in a long time. As I walked toward my car, I heard the door open behind me. Joshua's hurried footsteps followed, and he called out, "Wait." He pleaded that we could fix this, that I shouldn't leave like this. I stopped and turned to face him. In his eyes, I saw fear and regret, and a brief glimpse of the man I had fallen in love with. A spark I hadn't seen in a long time. "Joshua," I said gently, "sometimes you have to completely break something to repair it. We need time." "But you'll come back, right?" he asked in a barely audible whisper. I looked back at the house, seeing Karen's silhouette in the window watching us. "I don't know," I answered. "Honestly, it depends on many things," I told him. "Things about you, about me, and what I'll discover along the way. Especially during our time apart," I added. "And most importantly, whether I find a reason to return." With that, I got into my car and started the engine. I was leaving behind the house, Joshua, and the life I had known. Driving through the night, I felt a mixture of pain and liberation. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my own destiny. Joshua and Karen could never understand. They couldn't even imagine that my departure was just the beginning. A beginning that would change all of our lives in ways none of us could have predicted. The first few days after my departure were a whirlwind of emotions and sudden decisions. I settled into a small apartment in the city center. It was far enough from the old house to avoid accidental encounters, but close enough to keep an eye on things. During the first week, my phone never stopped ringing. Joshua called constantly, leaving messages that ranged from desperate pleas to promises of change. Karen alternated between fake concern and veiled threats about how my absence was destroying the family. I ignored most of these calls. I needed time and distance. Time to think and plan my next move. But I did take one call, from my lawyer. "Everything is in order," he told me in a professional tone. He confirmed that the transfer documents were officially registered, and the house was now in Joshua's name. I felt a knot in my stomach, a mixture of anxiety and determination. "Thank you," I replied. "Please proceed to the next phase of the plan." Days turned into weeks, and weeks into a month. Gradually, the calls from Joshua and Karen diminished from a downpour to an occasional drizzle. I wondered what they were thinking and doing in the house that was once mine. And then I knew it was time to make my next move. One morning, I carefully selected my outfit. A suit that I knew would convey confidence and resolve. Looking in the mirror, I noticed a new determination shining in my eyes. I was no longer the woman who had left that house a month ago, beaten down by manipulation and betrayal. I had become stronger, more resolute, a new version of myself. I drove to the old house and parked at a careful distance. From there, I could see the familiar front of the house, now adorned with the floral curtains Karen had undoubtedly chosen. Taking a deep breath to steady my nerves, I dialed Joshua's number. After 3 rings, he answered. His voice was a mix of tension and hope. "Hello," he said. "Is that you?" "Yes, Joshua." "It's me," I answered in a businesslike tone. I told him we needed to speak directly. A moment of silence followed, and I could imagine the confusion and anticipation on his face. "Of course," he finally said. He asked when and where we should meet. "Now," I replied. "I'm outside the house." I heard his breath catch and the sound of hurried movement. Seconds later, the front door burst open, and Joshua rushed out. He desperately scanned the area until he found my car. I slowly got out of the vehicle. I watched as a series of emotions crossed his face. Relief, joy, anxiety, and finally, cautious hope. We met in the middle of the front yard. The garden I had once meticulously tended was now adorned with cheap decorations that were undoubtedly Karen's doing. "You've come back," Joshua whispered. "No," I answered firmly. "I'm here to talk. Nothing more, nothing less." His expression clouded slightly, but he nodded. He asked if we should go inside. I shook my head. I told him I wanted to keep this conversation private. Joshua glanced nervously toward the house. I saw Karen's silhouette moving behind the curtains. Understood, he agreed, guiding me to a bench in the yard. We sat, and an uncomfortable silence stretched between us for several minutes. Finally, I broke the silence. I told him I had done a lot of thinking during our time apart. About us, our relationship, and what I wanted for my future. Joshua listened intently, his eyes fixed on me, hanging on every word. And I've made a decision, I continued. I announced that I would transfer the house's ownership to his name. His eyes widened, confusion and surprise flickering across his face. He asked if this hadn't already been done before I left. I smiled slightly. I explained that the previous transfer was just the first step. Now, I was prepared to complete a full and formal transfer. I don't understand, Joshua said, his voice laden with obvious confusion. He asked why I would do such a thing after everything that had happened. Because it's the right thing to do, I answered, carefully controlling my voice. I used Karen's own words against him, saying this was a family home, and he was family. I saw a flash of guilt in his eyes at the mention of his mother. About my mother. He began, but I cut him off. No, Joshua, I said firmly. I'm not here to talk about your mother. I'm here to resolve this once and for all. I pulled an envelope from my bag and handed it to him. I explained that all necessary documents were inside, and with his signature and a notary's, the transfer would be completely legal. Joshua took the envelope with trembling hands, looking at me with a mix of disbelief and suspicion. He asked if there was something hidden behind this gesture. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. I told him there was nothing hidden. I simply wanted to close this chapter and move forward. As Joshua reviewed the documents, I noticed the front door opening from the corner of my eye. Karen emerged, wearing a mask of false concern. She called out to us as she approached, saying how worried they had been. I stood up to face her. I told her I had returned only to settle some pending matters. Karen noticed the envelope in Joshua's hand, her expression shifting from worry to curiosity. She asked her son what it was. Still looking bewildered, Joshua explained it was paperwork to transfer the house's ownership completely to his name. I watched her eyes light up with a mixture of triumph and desire. She exclaimed that it was wonderful and said she thought someday I would understand. She insisted the house should be in a family man's name. I ignored her comment and turned to Joshua. I asked if he was sure, if he agreed to proceed with the transfer. Joshua looked at me, then at his mother, then back at me. I could see the inner conflict in his eyes. A struggle between what he thought he wanted and what he knew was right. Finally, he slowly nodded. He said he would agree if that's what I wanted. Excellent, I responded in a cold, businesslike voice. I suggested we complete everything at the notary's office the next day. Karen clapped her hands in joy, inviting us in for a special dinner. I firmly declined, saying I had other commitments. I told them I'd see them at the notary's office tomorrow. Then I turned and walked to my car, feeling their eyes on my back. In the rearview mirror, I saw Karen embracing Joshua, her face a mask of victory. They couldn't understand, couldn't even imagine, that this apparent surrender was just the beginning of my true plan. The next morning, we met at the notary's office. Joshua looked nervous, Karen was irritatingly confident, and I maintained a professional, calm demeanor. The notary reviewed the documents, explaining each clause in detail. I noticed Karen's eyes sparkling each time ownership transfer was mentioned. Then, the notary said finally, if both parties agree, we'll proceed with signatures. Joshua looked at me one last time, as if searching for some sign that this was an elaborate joke. But my face remained expressionless. He sighed and took the pen, signing the documents. Next to him, Karen was barely containing her joy. When my turn came, I signed with a fluency that even surprised the notary. "Congratulations, Joshua," I said, extending my hand for a formal handshake. I told him the house was now officially his. Karen couldn't contain her excitement. She suggested we have dinner to discuss my return, claiming she always knew I'd do the right thing. I cut her off with a cold smile. I made it clear I wasn't coming back, that this was a complete ending. Karen's smile faltered. She reminded me the house was now Joshua's. Exactly, I responded perfectly. I told her how Joshua chooses to use it is his decision, and I was done here. I collected my copy of the documents and walked toward the door. Turning back one last time, I spoke to Joshua with a meaning only he would understand. I advised him to carefully review his financial situation and his company's finances. I suggested he might find some surprises. I left the notary's office with a mix of relief and anticipation. Walking to my car, I heard Karen loudly asking, "What did that mean?" "Joshua, is there something you haven't told me?" I smiled to myself, knowing the real bomb was about to detonate. What they didn't know was that 3 months before all this drama, I had discovered Joshua's company was nearly bankrupt due to his inappropriate management as a financial officer. He had hidden this information from everyone, including me. The house I had just transferred was 90% mortgaged, with all the company's liabilities about to crash down on Joshua's personal assets. Karen, drunk on her perceived victory, had no idea she and her son would be paying off massive debts for years to come. Driving towards an uncertain but possibility-filled future, I felt a mixture of sadness and satisfaction. This wasn't how I had imagined my marriage would end, but it was a new beginning for me. For the first time in a long time, I truly felt free. 6 months later, I sat on the terrace of my new apartment, the sun caressing my face. I held a steaming cup of coffee and opened my laptop. 6 months since leaving behind the life I had built. I looked at the screen. A new company logo proudly gleamed. The header read, "New Dawn Consultants." I smiled to myself. In every sense, this was a new dawn for me. How appropriate the name was. Checking my morning emails, my mind drifted to the events that had led me here. Joshua's betrayal, Karen's invasion, losing my home. It was all a distant memory now, and felt like it had happened in another lifetime. One email particularly caught my attention. It was from my informant, an old friend who had agreed to keep me updated on the situation. I sighed and opened it. The message stated that the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Joshua's company had finally declared bankruptcy last week. Creditors were hounding him, and the house was in the process of being foreclosed. Karen was in a panic, blaming everyone except herself. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the information sink in. Despite everything, a part of me still felt pain for Joshua. After all, we had shared a life together. But another part of me, the part that had been betrayed and dismissed, couldn't help but feel a spark of satisfaction. I remembered the day I discovered the truth, 3 months before everything exploded. It was truly by chance. A mistakenly sent email, a half-overheard conversation. Small puzzle pieces that, when put together, revealed a complete picture. It was a shocking situation. Joshua's company, the one he had always been so proud of, was on the brink of collapse. Years of inappropriate management, hasty decisions, and worst of all, questionable financial practices had driven the company to the edge of ruin. Instead of facing the situation, Joshua had chosen to hide, burying his head in the sand as the problems grew. I remembered the night I confronted Joshua about this. His face had gone pale, panic filling his eyes. He had stammered that things weren't as bad as they seemed. He claimed he could fix it, that he just needed more time. But I knew the truth. I had seen the numbers, spoken to industry contacts. The situation was beyond salvation, and worse, Joshua had mortgaged our home, my home, to keep the failing company afloat. In that moment, watching my husband spin excuses and lies, something changed in me. The fundamental pillar of trust in our marriage had been irreparably broken. As if fate were testing my sanity, Karen then appeared. Her invasion, her arrogance, her thinly veiled contempt for my very existence. Joshua's capitulation to her demands, allowing me to be treated like a stranger in my own home, was the final straw. That's when I began to plan. Not for revenge, truly. But for survival, for the need to protect myself from a world that had suddenly turned hostile. I refocused on my laptop screen. The success of my new company has tested my perseverance and been a process of finding myself again. But I couldn't deny that a part of me was still curious about what was happening to them. As if answering my thoughts, my phone vibrated with a message. It was from Joshua. He begged me to talk, saying the situation had become complicated. He claimed Karen had lost control and that they needed my help. I stared at the message for several minutes. A storm of emotions swirled inside me. Should I ignore it and let Joshua and Karen drown in the disaster they'd created? But another part of me, the part that had once loved this man, felt an urge to respond. Finally, I sighed and began to type a reply. I apologized and told him I could no longer help. I said he had made his choices and now must live with their consequences. I wished him luck. After sending the message, I blocked his number. It was time to completely close this chapter. I stood up and walked to the edge of the terrace. This city had become my new home. Here, I had found not just business success, but a new version of myself. Thinking about Joshua and Karen facing the consequences of their actions brought conflicting emotions. On one hand, there was a certain satisfaction in knowing they were confronting the reality they had created. Karen's arrogance, her constant disrespect towards me, was now facing a harsh lesson in humility. Joshua was learning, in the most difficult way possible, that lies and cowardice always come with a price. Yet, on the other hand, I couldn't help but feel sadness. I had once loved Joshua and believed in our future. Watching it all collapse, even though it was due to his own actions, still brought a certain pain. But as I gazed at the city's horizon, I felt a wave of gratitude. This city had given me a second chance. An opportunity to redefine and build something new from the ashes of my previous life. My company has become a source of hope for many women. We specialized in helping women rebuild their careers and lives after divorce, loss, or simply when they felt a need for change. Every day, walking into the office and seeing the faces of my team members. Strong and resilient women who had overcome their own struggles. I felt I had found my true purpose. We were creating a community. A safe space where women could heal, grow, and thrive. I remembered a recent conversation with a client named Ashley, who had come to us completely devastated after a particularly difficult divorce. I never thought I could be strong again, she had said, tears of gratitude in her eyes. But now, being here and starting my own business, I've never felt more powerful. This is all thanks to you and the team. Such words, such moments, reminded me that everything I had experienced, no matter how painful, had been worth it. I had found my path, my purpose, and in the process, helped others find theirs. Returning to my laptop, I noticed a new email. It was an interview request from a local business magazine. They wanted to write a story about the women behind my company. I smiled as I began to draft a response. A year ago, I would have been terrified at the thought of being interviewed or sharing my story. But now, I was ready. Ready to share my life, my struggles, and my victories, hoping to inspire others to find their own strength. As I was finishing my email reply, the phone rang again. This time, it was an unknown number. Feeling slightly anxious, I answered the call. A woman's voice asked if I was the owner of New Dawn Consultants. Yes, that's me, I carefully responded. She sounded relieved, saying her name was Christine. She explained that Karen, my former mother-in-law, had given her my number. Karen believed I might be able to help her. I was momentarily speechless. Karen had recommended my services? The same woman who had once looked down on me so completely? Christine, I finally said, what is your relationship with Karen? A brief silence followed on the other end of the line. She was Karen's neighbor and said she noticed Karen was going through a tough time. When Christine shared her own situation of being abandoned by her husband and not knowing how to move forward, Karen had spoken about me. Karen had told her that I had gone through a similar experience and had rebuilt my life. She suggested that if anyone could help Christine, it would be me. I felt a whirlwind of emotions, surprise, confusion, and a strange sense of satisfaction. It seemed Karen had found enough humility to recognize the value of what I had built during my own difficult time. Christine, I said gently, I'd be happy to help you. Could you tell me more about your situation? As Christine shared her story, I couldn't help but reflect on life's unexpected turns. Here I was, about to help someone sent to me by the very person who had once tried to destroy me. The irony wasn't lost on me. But more than anything, I felt a deep sense of peace. I had certainly closed a painful chapter of my life. But in doing so, I had opened a new, beautiful chapter. A chapter full of purpose, growth, and the opportunity to make a real difference in others' lives. After finishing the call with Christine and promising to start working together on her new life, I gazed at the city's horizon once more. The sun was setting, painting the sky in gold and rose. Another day was ending, but tomorrow would bring new opportunities, new challenges, and new victories. And I was prepared to face them all with the strength and wisdom gained only through life's most difficult trials. Because ultimately, all the challenges, all the falls, all the betrayals had led me exactly where I needed to be. To my own new dawn.